Welcome, guys. We'll get started in a couple minutes once we get people here.
Sure, yeah. Sure, team.
Okay. Well, I see Stefan's joined. Let's hear. Let's give. Let's get started, and then we'll see. Alexis is joined here or not. Okay. So this is the March 6th meeting of the ORAN uh, working group for Nepio. We have on the agenda today a couple things. There's previous minutes approval. There is some informational things that I think you guys should be aware of, and the security piece. We'll just quickly go over those. But then the big focus today is around trying to resolve and get ready for that Crate O-Cloud cluster that we maybe hopefully get to scoping today. So is there anything else on the agenda that people are need to see? Okay. I don't hear anything, so let's get started. Again, the first item is the approval of the minutes. Probably have to learn how to spell approved correctly. But so these are the February 28th minutes. Are there any objections to approving these minutes? Okay. See nothing, so I'll mark these as approved. All right. And just to give you guys some updates, within SIG, the security SIG, they've been working on some workload identity, how they can secure workload identity with SPIFFE. And there's two documents that you may be not aware of or might be of interest to you. Certainly is of interest when I looked at them, particularly for some of our architects that we have in the ORAN. So there's this general presentation of what they want to try to do with workload identity. And then there's also this design document that exists out there where they make certain assumptions. And so I think it would behoove us for those members, particularly because they have certain behaviors associated with the management cluster versus the workload cluster, and where they have agents of SPIFFE and the server of SPIFFE. So If you're interested in that, or if you, I know that we have architectures where we have multiple management clusters. We may very well need to feed back some information to the security group to allow them to kind of get a better idea of maybe some of the architectures that they'll be seeing. So I leave that with you. It's just for information purposes. Um, are there any questions on that? Okay. So I think we'll move right into the Crate Cluster user story. Stefan, you're on. Did you want to take it from here?
I can do that, yes.
All right. I'll stop sharing.
I can share here.
And I'll just take notes and watch the hand.
Yeah. Can you see the user story now? Am I sharing?
Yes, sorry, I was speaking to mute. Yes, we can now see your screen.
No, I have not checked today because I was in workshop meetings the whole day. So if we can go through this, and if anyone has any comments and so on, you can highlight them. What I did based on the last meeting discussions was that I added things in this design consideration chapter. I added some bullets on the impact if you do an SMO implementation. Some impact for like an NFU IMS implementation, and then some common impact then. So basically, like on both either one or the other side, you will we are promoting a number of things, then, or these two things that we thought we should do. Shall I go through them one by one, or what is the best here?
Yeah, let's go through because this is this was requested from the last meeting, right? That we
Yes.
further understand these. So let's go through them and see what people think. Okay.
Yeah. So on the SMO side, we have suggested we should have like an infrastructure inventory resource backend service. Basically, this is like a cache or a copy of the information, the inventory information queried up from the OCloud, each OCloud IMS. I mean, this information then can be used by like an operator then on the SMO side in order to fetch information about a particular site, fetch information about a particular IMS, the IMS endpoint, IMS credentials, etc. Then, so we see like this information should be available then to some operators running in the SMO NFU instance. So then we thought that should be like a backend service then that we have there. Then the next thing we talked about is that we should have this southbound CAPI provider plugin then. So we suggest we are staying on CAPI as the framework for southbound integration like we have in R1, R2. But we now then do an O2IMS provisioning client side on this as a new CAPI provider plugin. Then this one is open for discussion, but I think we talked about it last week, that we identified that there would be some sort of a FOCOM NBI for CAS LCM on top of the native kept porch package management provided by NFU. So I identified that as an impact here also. This we need to decide on scoping for this standardized FOCOM NBI in terms of like basically the northbound adaptation then towards ORAN. In ORAN, you have certain things that is defined in order to realize like availability as an R1 interface, for example. You need to register yourself towards like the SME component. You need to have some sort of a support for a common federated authentication model, etc. At least those things, I think, should be part of this standardized FOCOM NBI. And then we need to decide on what level of abstraction we should have on top of the porch package API. If it is basically just a proxy of the porch API, I mean, that is possible. I mean, that is allowed in terms of the ORAN R1 specification, that you can come with the API you have as long as you register that API as available, and you can provide a relevant authentication method on it. So minimum, we have some sort of an authentication layer on top, and then we could say that we are proxying the port requests. Or if we would like to do something more abstract and say that, yeah, you have something kind of a deploy blueprint package or something, and then we are hiding all the steps beneath in terms of port package variants or a sequence of cloning, updating, committing. That is a part of, I think, a detailed discussion we would need to have. But I'm just identifying that some level of NBI, I think we would need to have here. I'm not going into more details at this time.
All right. So
Yeah.
so then what we need to do on this one, this is why I raised my hand, is
Yeah.
we'll have to get with OSC, with SEISU, on identifying the API that they want on the northbound, with the
Yeah.
pieces of it. So
Yeah.
there's an action item here, right, that we're going to have to take, I think, to communicate with SEISU and the OSC team on the FOCOM NBI, right?
Yeah. He's not here today, right? No.
No. So
Okay.
are you
How-
able to do that, or do you want me to initiate it with SEISU? I usually just, he does the network. He's on
Yeah.
Slack, right?
I can reach out to him there on Slack and
Okay.
see if he can.
If
I
you
can do
can't,
that.
if you can't
Yeah.
get him on Slack, then let me know and
Mhm.
I'll bump
Mhm.
him. Okay.
Fine.
So-
Thanks.
I don't think you can reach him on Slack.
Uh-huh.
It's better to email him or something.
Or if you'd help me with that, then Tim,
Yeah, sure. I could connect you.
You-
with that.
you
oh,
gotta
you
take-
can, Ravi.
All right. So I've got Robbie and Stefan going to
Okay.
reach out to
Yeah.
to SEISU on this one.
Yeah.
Because,
That's excellent. Very good.
all right.
So
Thank
we need to resolve that we try to see what we can do for next week then there on that discussion. Because
Yeah, but that's an
basically-
internal design that
Yeah,
should
yeah.
not matter with the Nepio enablement, right? The use of the Nepio enablement, will it?
no,
Okay, all right. Just wanted to make sure.
this is more like the way we are integrating towards like Oran, on FOCOM on MBI level. Then I have said that there will be additional FOCOM NBIs for infrastructure inventory exposure. I have thought that they are not really so tied to Nephew. I mean, here we will query up the infrastructure data from O2 IMS. We are expected as a FOCOM to provide an NBI for higher level systems and RAPs, and so to be able to query for that data. I don't know what to do about this one in the Nephew alignment here. I mean, for sure it will need to be, but here I'm a bit uncertain on what we should actually.
Yeah, so there's a couple points, right? One, OSC doesn't have any inventory P&ID yet, right? They haven't got
Right.
those services in.
Yeah.
So while we probably do need additional NBIs, again, when you talk with SEISU, talk to them about this, but we may not have these NBIs for release, for the first release until OSC requires these NBIs for the infrastructure. I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
I don't know if they necessarily need the infrastructure inventory yet where they're at in their maturity.
Because I think it could be possible to face this and not necessarily have an exposure initially, assuming that that puts more information on the client to get this information in some other way, having like a more of a batch list of the target sites or something.
Yeah, but I don't think he has a client yet to do it, right? That needs it.
Yeah,
That's what I'm saying.
exactly.
So, but ask
Yes,
SEISU,
I agree.
I think this one will probably get bumped. You will, though,
Yeah.
have to keep within FOCOM, you will have to, though, keep some sort of infrastructure inventory.
Internally, yes.
Yeah.
That is the first bullet. That one I
Right.
think we need anyway, so that we can query. I mean, internally we have like operator logic and so on that can query this as a backend. It's more the question, shall we expose it towards other SMO services northbound?
That's right. Wim, you got your hand raised?
Yeah, I was just going to say that we do have an inventory system already since R1, right? So we have nodes and links and clusters. And so my view is that for the cluster, my view is that if you look at the cluster itself, what I would like to do, or I mean, that's maybe good for feedback, is that I want to split cluster into two parts. One is a cluster, which is basically the control plane, and the other one is a node pool or node set, as some people call it, which is the worker nodes. And whether in some cases you will instantiate them together, in some cases you might use them independent. And so that ties to the node object that we already have, right? So if you take a node pool and you say I need replicas of 10 or replicas of 3, you'll get 3 node objects, which represents the entities, whether it's a VM or whether it's a server that reflects that. So we do have already a backend, right? An inventory system, because otherwise we would never be able to set up a topology, for example.
I haven't seen it. So are you referring to like a site inventory where you have basically before you even deploy the cluster, that you have knowledge about like which target site?
So that we did,
because
it's easy. Yeah, so at the moment we create the clusters from scratch, basically, right? So the inventory is a result of that action, right? But you also have other scenarios where you have to discover the cluster when it's already created, right? That we did not do, right?
Yeah.
But there is a concept of a site and a node and a link and stuff like that. We have that.
Yeah, but here I'm more into actually discovering or at least storing information about the site and the hardware equipment in that site even before you have created the cluster. So it's not about registering the clusters. It's about exposing the infrastructure or hardware resources that are available on the IMS side in order to like I see like you have a reference like in some of the examples now there are references to a region. It's not really used because then you just deploy actually a kind cluster. But in a similar way, then you would need a reference to like a site where there is available hardware so that the IMS can use in order to do deployment.
So just to give you a sense, right? So for example, when we did, so I have an intercluster networking solution ready actually, but there's some other work pending that triggers it. So it actually has hardware details in that. Because I need to know whether the server has, how many NICs it has and stuff like that, right? So it has, and it's using a CRD for that, basically. And that would be an object that would either be discovered or you can create it. So you have the choice how you consume it. What I'm trying to say is that we have already, I'm not saying it's complete, it's by far complete.
Oh, you have a CRD model for hardware objects.
Yes, which is just a node. A node can be a server, can be a network device, can be a VM. You can use it however you want. It's an attribute that you set to it. And that's what we use. So we have an abstract object because we didn't want to bubble a VM or a physical device or a physical network switch or something like that. We just create a node, and a node object can be used for any of it.
And that node object belongs to a location or something, or how do you?
It's also an attribute. Yeah, so you have an attribute like a label you attach to it, and then it belongs to a site. Yeah. That's what we already have.
So, can you share some? Because
I mean, if you take our deployment, I'll share the CRD from our deployments that we do in R1 and R2, so you will see those objects.
I was a bit struggling with this related to how shall we on the SMO side, how shall we actually store the inventory data model? For me, I was not thinking about necessarily to represent it as like KRM resources, like CRs then. it's rather more of a backend database with all of the information, because it's basically a cache of the information you have read up from the O2IMS. You don't really reconcile anything on those objects, or it's more like you just query for them and fetch things. But yeah, I'm open to
That's correct.
suggestions.
Yeah.
Stefan,
That's
and
correct.
the way we have to handle this though, because O2IMS has specific resource representations for inventory. Okay, what we have to do is we have to treat Nepio as a data source or provider of that information, and that's the integration that we got to look at, right? Because what Wim is saying is that he has ways of providing a node, some infrastructure information, right? That's not going to be represented the same way as ORAN will represent that across the O2IMS, right? So we got to treat them as a data source provider, like you would do any other data source provider, right? In your hard, it could be as thin as you want, but remember, there's going to be the way that you represent it. There'll be some sort of translation to the standard resource model with the ORAN. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, what I was trying to say is the following. Even for us, even in R1 and R2, in order to do certain things, we need also some inventory information, right? So what I was just trying to say is that we have modeled something already that we can potentially use, right? I'm not saying that this is the way, but it's very flexible because we didn't. So the problem with resource modeling, so for example, we have been using it for IETF. So IETF is a topology model, right? It basically does everything for it, because in Kubernetes, you have labels and annotations. So you can basically, it's so flexible that you can actually, I have already 5 use cases that I've used this object for without any change. But okay, there is a few people with their hands up.
Yeah, I get it. So a lock, I think we got a lock in Bitch.
Yeah. Thanks, Win, for the pointers. I'm more into like, okay, you mentioned about CRDs that we already have for like representing NICs that needs to be provisioned or configured as part of the cluster creation, right? And I mean, is it after like compliancy to the ORAN and what we are defining here as part of the cluster creation user story, or
see, at the end of the day, I mean, see, none of this has been modeled for ORAN specifically, right? Because I am of the opinion, maybe to the people on the call, is that ORAN is nothing different than any other cloud. Okay, so that's my view. So it's, in other words, the fact that we are using ORAN as a vehicle to do so, it's okay. But for me, ORAN is just an implementation, but there are many others. So I'm of the opinion that Nepio should not be biased to ORAN as such, right? It should be generic, such that we can do anything, including ORAN. Okay. So as such, it's not modeled after ORAN. What I'm just saying is we have inventory because we also need it, right? So as such, that's what I've been trying to do inside of Nepio always is not try to build very specific implementations, because what you'll end up seeing is that you'll have to change and change and change and change for every other use case, and as a result is there is so a cluster for ORAN is another cluster. There might be some specific attributes that ORAN needs, right? But in its global scope, it's a cluster, and a cluster has
I think,
and so there will be specific attributes for like the real-time curl and stuff like that. But again, it's an attribute of an object. We don't have to make a specific object because that attribute is there for ORAN. At least that's my view.
Yeah, I would agree partially, right? I mean, ORAN, it's a standard defining like multi-vendor interfaces. And then I agree, I mean, on the cloud is a cloud, whether it has to be specified by the ORAN as a no cloud, or it has to support the service model, right? But the thing is, or the differentiator is, we have the multi-vendor interface, right? And 2 management layers, right? One in the SMO, which has the service level view, versus you have the IMS, the infrastructure management service, as another management layer, which has your infrastructure controller, or which is the infrastructure controller managing your infrastructure components and fulfilling those service requests coming in from the SMO layer. So I agree, but the thing is, in the R1 and R2 releases so far in Nephew, I think the scope was very limited to the OCloud realization and how those services, when it comes to the OCloud, should be or shall be fulfilled, right? And now with the additional, yeah.
Okay.
No, go ahead, Stefan.
I just wonder, in just concepts of time also. So, to what extent do we need to detail this in the use case, in this design consideration? This is like how we will implement it. If I say here, implement a resource backend service, I mean, that can then be realized by these node CRs then, that like if we decided to go with that as the implementation. I was more thinking about like a memory database or even a Postgres database and so on. Is that something we need to detail at this point before we can take the decision to go to the next step? Or is that part of actually that next step to do the detailed design of this use case?
Again, I think what you have to realize is that Nepio does have an infrastructure inventory. And so again, using that minimally, using that as a data source is an important aspect of what you want to try to do as you utilize these enablers, right? Because that there's expectations on the topology and the deployment of the workload that kind of utilize, correct me if I'm wrong, Wim, but utilize the Nepio concept, these Nepio CRs. Or like
yeah, I was just saying, my only remark was we have something, it's typically something that is unknown, right? So that's why I was raising the topic.
Yeah, because I was not aware of it. So
correct.
shall I say something like extend the current infrastructure inventory? Yeah, or if you have...
Maybe we have to go to the details to see how we use it and stuff like that. I was just saying there is something. It's not that there is nothing.
Yeah, or shall we leave it like this? I mean, for sure, if there is something there that we can use as a design base, then absolutely, I agree. We should consider to use it. I just wonder.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, if you look what is etcd as a backend of Kubernetes, it's a key value store, right? What is an inventory? Key values, right? So it's perfect for it actually as a vehicle. For us, the reason it's there, the reason we modeled it as CRDs, it's easy because we can consume it straight from the API, right? We don't need to yet do another integration with Postgres and blah, 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 right? So that's why we did it, because it makes our life very easy.
Because I need to take a look at it, and I think that if I write like that, I mean, the existing model shall be considered as a design base.
Okay, so let's
and we will not forget it.
Let's quickly get Vish, Joey, and Robbie, knowing that we're going to have to do some additional work to figure out how we're going to use, not how much, but how are we going to use the Nepio. Go ahead, Joey. I believe you're next, or Vish. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So, Wim, I mean, just want to get clarification. You were talking about some node CR that you plan to define. Did I hear that right, or did I misunderstand that? I just wanted a clarification on that.
We already have it.
Okay.
We already have it.
Because I also wanted to bring out the point that there might already be certain CRs already defined out there that we might be able to reuse rather than trying to create anything new. Maybe I misheard them.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And also, are we going to I mean, until now, I wasn't thinking that Nepio was providing any inventory information. Is it defined what inventory information we're going to be providing? I know we have a management cluster, right? And it probably knows the different, workload clusters that it actually has provisioned. Is that at the level, that is the level that I'm aware of anything related to inventory? Is there more that we plan to
It's
provide?
even
to the
today in such a way, so it's per cluster per node, right? But at the moment we only have one link, one node, right? Because so we are a bit constrained there. But when I did my intercluster networking thing, right? That's still on the table. I modeled as many nodes as you want, and I introduced also the concept of a node pool because that's how people typically use it. How people use it, at least in the public cloud. Some people use node sets, right, as the tool because that's the terminology in Kubernetes. I don't care, but so as such, if you want, also for example, when we did NF to infra type of job, right, you need to know how many. So for example, you have to install a kernel driver, a kernel module. On a node, if you don't know the nodes, you don't know what to. So you see, when you go to the level of detail, we need that level of information, and so that's why it was built already like that, and we built a very generic building block, even already in R1, by the way. We have that. So I'll share. I'm just looking them up.
I zoomed this in now then, but this is like we have this information also in the O2 IMS specifications, and so we have this information about site locations, resource pools, resources. You have resource types. Each resource has one resource type. So there is like a fairly well-defined structure of these things that we at least can start with. Then I think that one is still a bit work in progress even in Oral. And I think it's good enough to start with for now for this purpose. And in mainly in order to identify like, okay, what is the target site? Do you have resources that are matching the requirements of the template and such things? You can take those decisions then based on this model.
Correct.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, let's sorry.
Okay, so I think Joey, you're next.
Joey?
Yeah, thank you. There's something that I just want to get clarity on. When it was said that ORAN is the implementation and then NetFlow should be kind of agnostic or generic to that. Would it not be the other way around, that ORAN is the standardization and the more kind of generic, and that is the NetFlow the implementation of that then? Not to say that NetFlow can't do more or not, it doesn't have to cover everything, but it should at least conform to what ORAN has standardized. So really,
Well, I don't think you can do
maybe
that.
I misunderstood.
Joey, yeah, we can't do that, Joey, right? Because we can't say, well, I guess we could if you can get the NetFlow community to agree to it. But generally, you can't say that our definition of infrastructure is the NetFlow definition of infrastructure. That's what I think that we want to say. He's trying to create something that has, that has trying to meet the needs of multiple communities, one of which is ORAN. That's the way we have to approach it, right? Now, if we have a big mismatch, between what it's looking for, then we're going to have to sort that out, right? And I think Wim and the NetFlow team is quite open to that. He's just saying, I'm not going to use I'm not obligated, NetFlow is not obligated, as they develop their enablers, it's not obligated to define those enablers strictly as ORAN stuff, right? Because they've got other clients.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. That kind of clarifies it for me. That makes sense. No, thanks.
Yeah. Robbie?
Yeah, sorry. Wim, I have this. Probably it's a similar question online with Wish. So where did because when we did, we have concepts related to cluster management, but from an inventory management perspective, what are the CRs? You mentioned there are CRs that defines site and some kind of nodes and resources there, and then you can define clusters out of it. Because right now we only have workload cluster, and okay, we say there is a set of CNIs requirements, and then you create time clusters kind of thing, right? Our starting point is pretty much in that virtualized kind of domain. So do we have?
But we have, for example, there is a nodes.inventory, there is a links.inventory, there is a workload cluster.inventory object, which is basically what we are looking for, I think.
Okay, but did we use those in R2? Is it already a part of the kind of workload cluster
We already use
provisioning?
them. Yes, we already use them in R1, by the way.
Okay, I might
So,
have missed that
where are
part.
they? Because I have not seen them in the R1 demo, but that is the only thing I have really
No, but they are handled
Yeah.
under the cover, right? So they
Under the
get
cover.
created, and so we are consuming them. For example, when we set up a topology, right? So they are being used. So we interconnect the cluster. So we need to know, okay, where
Yeah.
are the nodes, which
Yeah.
clusters need to be interconnected. So they are used for that, for example.
Okay. But if you share that, like the name of them, then I can look for them. Or if you have the specification of that CRD.
I will share. And nodes dot
Yeah.
it's nodes.inventory and links.inventory.
Yeah.
Inventory even.
Okay. So basically, the basic with what I see with this use case is that when you create the cluster, you need that inventory to validate whether you could this cluster is a valid cluster and can be created from the site or not. But are we talking about something that has been created as part of the cluster creation, or is it like kind of a priori, a pre-existing thing that I didn't know there was anything like that. That's why I was clarifying.
No, so at the moment, what we do is we create them on the base of the cluster, right? So it's a derivative of the cluster. I think what you typically want to have, you have a site inventory, right? But
exactly,
I think you always have two scenarios. But I think the object itself doesn't change how you use it, right? We just at the moment inside of Nefio consume it as so we create it when we create a site, but you could also go the other way around and say, hey, I'm going to provision a site with these characteristics. Can I deploy this network function onto it? That part we did not implement, but the data structure of the object doesn't change whether you use it in mode A or B.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you need the other way around for this. That is
exactly.
dependency.
So would it be another like site.inventory we would need to add here then, or how?
No, we have an inventory. So the way it works is the following. So there is nodes object, and so in Nefio we use labels for a lot of stuff, right? So there is a site label attached to a node.
I understand. Okay, so you will use the node for all those layers then, like node for a resource node, a site node. Yeah,
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it can be used for anything. For example, I was just looking up the CRD. For example, so there is a provider called Docker in the node because we are using kind clusters because they are Docker. The provider is docker.io. Right? So it's even implemented as such that you can basically say, okay, this is the thing that actually implements the node object. But we didn't want to implement what a lot of people do is they say, I need a VM, I need a bare metal, I need a container, right? And there's other objects, and they define objects for each of them. But then you're going to create 100 CRDs or 100 things. Whereas if you just have an attribute that says, okay, what type of node is this? You can do almost anything. You see?
Yeah, I understand.
That's the model, the approach that we took, right? So we said, okay, we need a node. So for example, right now we use a Docker because we use kind cluster. So there is a provider called docker.io that is attached. But you could basically say it's a VM, and actually you could even say it's Fedora or it is this implementation. So you can attach these attributes to it. So that's the approach that we took, because then you can be very flexible into the use case that you have. And for example, we also use it to model a networking device. So it's the same node object. It basically says the implementation is this instance. So this switch of this vendor does it. And so then you just consume it.
Okay, so
I will take a look at it. What I have said here now, then for now, is like we should consider this as a design base. I think perhaps that is as far as we really need to go in this user story, right?
So Stefan,
this is just my thinking that like we need to, then the activity to implement this will be like the next step.
Right.
Yeah. So I have one comment on this story. This is essentially the create cluster story, right? I know we are doing it in the context of ORAN. and there are FOCOM pieces, there are NFO involved at some point of time. Obviously, from the cloud side, there's O2 IMS involved and stuff like that. So I think if you look at the whole picture, the scope and the dependencies becoming larger and larger, because essentially we are saying on the SMO side, SMO management cluster, Nephew, we need all these dependencies. We need to have all these databases, stuff like that. And then on the cloud side, we need to have this O2 IMS implementation ready, stuff like that. So if you look at this whole thing, I'm thinking just the dependencies and the scope of the story is getting huge. Although the story itself is just create cluster. So I was wondering, can we have this? The scope is very minimal in the sense that we are writing just like the way you explained on the SMO management cluster side. We will just write that adapter, and then on the Nephew cluster side, we will write. We may need one more adapter actually, because so if we can wrangle the requirement and wrangle the scope, then the scope of the story becomes very small, and rest of the things we can tackle as part of the different stories. Anything related to FOCOM side on the SMO management cluster or O2 IMS side. So if you do that, if you just for a minute, if you assume we do not need O2 IMS service, complete O2 IMS service, that's what I meant, which on the cloud side, and we do not need all the functionalities of FOCOM/NFO on the SMO side, this story becomes very simple. Then all other dependencies will go away. So
But
can
what
we?
is, yeah. So which part is it you would like to keep then? If we look at the overall architecture, this one.
No, I like to keep the architecture.
So you would like to just do a subset?
Yeah, I like the way you
this,
written. I'm not
yeah.
suggesting. Yeah, I like the way the architecture, the explanation and all. But from the purely scope perspective, can we just say that as a part of this story, I'm not asking you to remove anything from this story, but from a acceptance criteria perspective, as a part of this story, we can say we will write this adapter like the way you showed on the FOCOM side, and we will just if there is some adapter needed on the IMS side, on the IMS Nephew management cluster side, we'll just write that. Essentially, we will realize creating the cluster, even though other services may not be ready at that point of time. You see what I mean?
It's a bit of a phasing then. I can.
So, for example, is O2 IMS a requirement for this story? If on the workload?
Yeah, right. That is what I thought. That we basically at least some sort of a pre-O2 IMS interface here, so that we can integrate towards that one.
Yes.
Otherwise, it will become. It will not become an O2 IMS. Otherwise, it will become some sort of a IMS specific adapter on the SPI side then.
No. On the workload side, for this story to begin, for example, as the story is written on the workload side, I'm talking, not on the Nephew side. Sorry, not on the SMO side. Is O2 IMS interface a prerequisite before we start the story?
Bala, we're doing ORAN integration. We want to just create clusters.
Yes,
some OSS. We'll do that as a different worker.
Let me complete. I'm not suggesting we do not. I'm not saying we do not do that work. I'm suggesting the story can be done without that. That's the other part of the story later.
Then I can perhaps ask you, Balabak, if we say no, then we assume that this the IMS side, we have like a Nephew based IMS, and there you have also like a kept Porsche package management APIs with blueprints then defined on the IMS side. Then this O2 IMS NBI, for now, I could imagine that again then here, okay, we need to sync with OSC again, but we could have something fairly thin here that we are saying that, okay, this is our proposal, that the O2 IMS interface could basically be something more or less exposing a little higher level variant of the Porsche package management. Like you deploy packages basically via O2 IMS.
Yes,
and
I just want.
And I think that, yeah. Yeah.
I just want to qualify my question. Sorry, when I say O2 IMS, I should have made it a better statement. What I meant to say is the prerequisite of having O2 IMS inventory API implemented before we do this. Is that a requirement?
No, that's what we're
Okay.
saying. They're going to go check with, okay, so I was just trying to be nice here. They're going to go check with Seishi. Seishi's going to say, I don't need it. And then we're not going to do the MBL.
Yeah.
Right, for the inventory piece. But
Okay.
So that is you are right. I think we can check that with him and see if this part about querying could be like taken out. I mean, I think there should be something in terms of this inventory resource backend. This can instead, if we don't have a query from O2 IMS, it could be something that we are just providing. I could imagine a registration interface, some way you are pre-populating this information on the SMO side, and instead of querying.
Yeah. I think we should yes. So eventually, maybe in 1 or 2 releases, everything will come together. But for this particular story, if you just focus on the create cluster, I like the way you're written, Stephen. Just from the acceptance criteria, I'm talking about. We will write this adapter layer on the SMO side, and if needed, we write an adapter. It will be ORAN. It will be based on cluster template that you guys are proposing on ORAN. That's fine. But if you can just wrangle the scope, then probably we can start this story early and complete this story early. That's all I'm saying.
I can then I can divide this already now, and we should have that sync then. But we could divide it in like some sort of a phase 1, phase 2, at least related to this inventory exposure.
Yeah.
And also on this side here, because it's related to this bullet and on the IMS side, like having not this one, sorry, the O2 IMS NBI for inventory exposure on the IMS side.
Yeah.
We could wait with them then. I think we could focus on the provisioning NBIs and make sure that we have
that's
a
all I'm
provisioning.
saying, yes.
Okay, I follow you. Yeah, I can. That is something I think I can update here. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt, but I agree we can take the phased approach, but if I follow the last statement which you made, Stefan, like we can focus on the provisioning workflow without focusing on the inventory exposure. But then if that's the case, how will OCloud or IMS decide which particular site to be selected for the cluster provisioning if there is no inventory exposure?
Right. There's gotta be, guys. I'm gonna hang on just a second.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, hang on, Bala. So just to be clear, when we do a create cluster, right? There's got to be, from the SMO, there's got to be some way for them to decide that there's allocable or available inventory in order to create that cluster on, and then they need to have an inventory to create the cluster. We don't have to, in the initial release of this thing, and that's what Bala is going to do, we don't have to do the full exposure of that. It could be just a provider type of implementation. So we can do a very thin one, is what I think people are coming to. We just got to go figure out what that is, only what is needed to support great cluster and delete cluster. Okay, that's what I think. That's what Bala is trying to get to, right? Just only for what we're trying to do, right? We're not going to have the full blown O2 IM. If I looked at the O2 IMS specification and I looked at the inventory piece of it, we don't need all that for the first phase, but we do need to have some inventory concepts within there in order for one, the SMO to home, if they're going to home. That's a conversation that they do, and to create the cluster, right? Create the cluster on. You have to have that concept of that. Okay, that's the minimum that you need, right? And you can even talk to Seishu about what he's going to use to home, because he might not be ready to home right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, we could do that. Or Alok, you know what? In the bare minimum case, we can just populate it using the script, the inventory database in the SMO side, and then.
But I think. But I think you will need to populate still internally also on the IMS side. You would need to populate that same inventory information then. So even it's script based populated, but I think you need to feed it in on both sides then.
Yeah, we could do that. And my
Yeah.
second point was, sorry, I know I'm taking a
Yeah.
little bit longer. I think to your original point and Wim's discussion about having a data store. Wim, did you mean that all this inventory data store can be stored in etcd? Is that what you meant?
See, it's what is an inventory? It's basically I
Because
need
if they are,
it's very
the-
simple.
yeah, but what I'm trying to say is this: if we are a part of this group, right? We are trying to implement SMO, both SMO and workload on Nepio. But if you're doing the SMO based implementation, we may be managing 10,000 clusters
Yeah.
as a part of that
Yeah, not a
SMO.
problem. Not a problem.
10,000 cluster, if you see the whole inventory information that's being stored, I don't know whether we can use the Kubernetes internal etcd for that.
No, but see, so the fact that we use a CRI, we'll discuss in a bit, right? So you can use any backend. You will see in a bit from myself, right?
Okay.
The fact that you can use another backend, not etcd, to do it eventually, right? So, but we should see what I think we are trying to accomplish in Nepio. Anything is KRM. Is modeled through KRM. And you will see in the demo that you will do in the 10 minutes. Why? Because
in the
there's a
automation meeting, okay.
huge benefit. No, you can do, there's lots of stuff you get out of the box when you do so, right? And I think that's what I'm proposing. But if you see that, okay, etcd is not sufficient for the job, you just replace the backend with whatever you want, and that's it. But the front end stays the same.
Okay. Thank you. I'll look for the demo.
Hey
and
guys, so just a second. So
Yep.
I just want to make sure, because we've only got about 8 minutes left. I want to make sure Alexis had comments that he was making. So if we can, Alexis, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to make your case of what you were looking for. Okay.
Okay,
Thanks,
cool.
Tim.
Thanks, Tim.
I'll go quick because it's in line with what Wim was saying. That's why I raised my hand. Everything should be KRM driven. At least that's our aspiration in Nepio. And when I look at some of the updated portion of the proposal, I think it's where we have the definition of the various IDs that we're expecting as part of probably a payload. There is a definition of OCloud Cluster Template ID, OCloud Site ID, OCloud Cluster Template ID. Sorry, I'm repeating myself, and OCloud Cluster Template Input. And the way it's defined in the document, and so it's I can tell you what page if you want to scroll down, page 7. Okay, this is where I have a little bit of a comment. It is defined in a very RESTful non-KRM type. In Nepio,
they are coming from ORAN.
Yeah, but I'm coming from Nepio. So in Nepio, everything is, to identify a specific object, we use what we called a key, a group. Sorry, was there some answers to me in there? I see my name. We see some in Nepio we use group kind version combination. Yeah, exactly. I see my comment there, but
I put your comment in there because I was like, I didn't want to lose it.
Oh, okay, thanks.
And
so yeah, that's exactly my comment, right? In Nepio, we always use group kind value combination along with name and sometimes namespaces to depict a specific resource. A resource can be a no-cloud site, can be a no-cloud cluster ID, and even in Nepio, this is what we did with the NF functions. With NF deployment, we have what we called a parameter ref KRM. That is, again, a KRM-based kind of a resource where we can embed that, hinted property bag that the OCloud cluster template inputs refer to. So that way it's more modeled in a KRM fashion. And so that's where my comment mostly is about. I'm questioning whether this team really wants to go forward with more of a traditional kind of way of depicting objects with IDs. And I understand that fits probably better a traditional inventory system. But given we're in Nepio and we strive to do everything KRM based, anyway, that's my comment. and I would value some feedback on the comment or some opinions. And I'm sorry if it's getting to some of you, not ready with that comment. I posted it on Slack, but I couldn't put it on the doc.
Yeah. So if we say we go with Wim's proposal, then we have like basically a node CR object representing the OCloud site, and that object in itself then will have a name. And then what you say is that the reference, when we refer to that one then in like another CR, we should refer to that CRD ID.
Correct.
I think I'm good with that.
Correct.
I think
and
it's
that,
more, yeah.
And that reference is using what we call GKV, so group key version, group kind version, which is a way to depict the specific object class in Kubernetes and then its name and namespace if we need to be more specific.
What is a bit problematic is I see this OCloud cluster template ID. I mean, that is something that you refer to on the other side, right? So if you have a SMO Nephew workload cluster template, you would like to refer to an OCloud Nephew workload cluster template, and the reference should be valid over the O2IMS API. So it should not be like a kept revision package or something. It should be something that is agnostic to whether you are using kept or whatever package management in your work in your OCloud side. I mean, because it should work in either case,
Stefan,
right?
Stefan,
so that is what I'm struggling for. Yeah.
Stefan, join the session in 3 minutes.
I was about to say that. I would like. Will you record that session, because I will not be able to join that. I would have. It would have been good. I didn't know about it, but can you record it and share that link?
Yeah, it will be recorded. So, but the idea is to decouple ourselves from kept, basically, and whether you use kept is a choice, right? So, but one of the things that I will discuss is
good.
that. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. So let's wrap this up. We got about 3 minutes, right? So I think what we're going to do is we're going to hold this over again for another week, which is fine. Because I think what we have to do is we have to get a little clarity with Seishu and the northbound and the scoping just a little bit. But more importantly, I think we have to come to some sort of decision on the use of KRM versus ID, the group kind of. All right, and then once we understand that, then I think everything else is resolved. So, but I think we need to see what Wim's talking about with respect to that first, right? And then make that decision. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah.
Thanks,
Tom,
Tim.
it's a comment there on that. If you look at, so I understand the Nephew world, right? And I also looked at the specs from the ORAN. So obviously there is certain friction. So because one is completely declarative system, which is still evolving, and then ORAN system has a stage 3 APIs, which are based on REST. And for example, if you implement any stage 3 APIs in the OCloud side, and if you query clusters, and if you query servers, everything, any ID in ORAN API is defined by a UUID. So, and it's not only for the gets, and then when you do invoke any set operations on that ID is expected from the O2IMS cloud side.
Bala, Kubernetes is the same, right? There is a UUID for every group version kind namespace name.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is we need to, yeah, Tim. Basically, what I'm trying to say is we need to understand these different nuances and try to marry the world. That's all I'm saying. I think.
Yeah, but we also allocate. So Bala, if you use today the resource backend now, of course with etcd, so it's mandatory to allocate a UUID, right? If you use another backend, you have the choice, but of course it's a good practice to implement a UUID typically as part of the thing. But so the Kubernetes API basically has a UUID as part of the spec. So what happens typically when you create an object, the first thing that happens in the server is you allocate a UUID.
Okay, so yeah, Wim, I'm really looking forward to your demo in the automation meeting.
Yeah, but yeah, I need to. Yeah, I'll jump. But there is a UI. I'll share with you.
Yeah, the
there is a
UUID
UUID
is
for
how
every
you're
KRM.
gonna get around that. That's right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, guys. So it is.
Okay.
It's 11 time. It's Wim time.
Yep.
So I'm gonna let you guys go, and we'll
Yep.
see you next week. Thanks.
Cool.
Thank you.
So much. Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.